I'm here with John Raneo, the old chief of police. We're just going to interview him about his experiences before and during World War II. Thought we'd go in chronological order, kind of makes sense. So first I'd like to ask you what your life was like in Harwich before the war and during the Depression.
Well, there wasn't much really before the war. It was a quiet town, and most of the time I just went to school and played around because Harwich was a little different then. We had a lot of areas to play in. It's built up quite a bit now, so there really is no place for kids to go to. But we had a lot of fun fishing, swimming, skating, and generally going to school.
Okay. What sort of economic conditions? I mean, obviously it was not good, but were there definite groups in Harwich where these people had more than others?
Oh yes, I think we call them the rich people. They lived down in Harwich Port. The rest of the town was pretty poor, because this was during the Depression, and you had to make do with whatever you had. Most everyone had a garden plot, not much work, so he just made, from day to day, and just struggled.
So during that time, FDR came in with his New Deal. Some of the other people we interviewed said that he was not well liked in Harwich. Do you remember that? Or?
Well, I don't recall too much about politics at that time. I think that he did a lot of good works. The WPA for one, the CCCs for another. It gave people a job, not much money. They made very little money, but at least it kept them busy and kept them going, and at least you could feed your family.
So did his programs have any impact on your family in particular?
No, not really. See, my family were all kids. I was the oldest, and my father was in the hospital. He was a veteran of World War I, so we never got to see him. So we kind of grew up by ourselves. So there really no impact from the federal government.
Now, before the war broke out, did you know anything about Hitler or the what was going on? And if you did, how did you feel about it?
Well, yes, I went to high school at the Brooks Academy, and during history class and geography class, we used to listen to Hitler ranting and raving on the radios. So we knew quite a bit about Europe.
And where were you, and what did you feel when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
My birthday is December the 6th, and I was home from the service. I was a sergeant then. And I heard it on the news, and of course they stated everyone to return back to camp, so I had to go back to camp. So that kind of killed my birthday.
So you were already in the service at that point. When did you enter?
Well, I graduated from Harwich High School in 1940, and I entered the service in April of 1941 as a regular. I had enlisted in the Air Corps at that time, hoping that I could fly, but I never did. After Pearl Harbor, of course, I got into the infantry.
Did you have other people in your family or friends that went? Did most of the men in your class go off to war?
No, I was the oldest in my class. All the others were still in school. My two sisters and my brother. So they really wasn't impacted with the war. Originally, I had enlisted because I thought that I was going to make some money and help my mother out. Because I found out they only paid $21 a month. And that kind of deflated me. But it worked out all right in the end.
So you went to school before the war, and you were out of school by the time the war had occurred, so it didn't really affect your school days.
No, it didn't.
Let's see. What branch of, just general questions about what you did in the Army, what branch were you in, and etc.
Well, as I say, I wanted to get into the Air Corps, which I never did. They kept me at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, for quite a while and kept promoting me. And after the war broke out, I happened to be up in, well, it's the air base, Dow Field. I think there's a different name now in Maine. And I was stationed there with some men, and because we were transporting German prisoners to Canada, when I got the word to go to the officer school, and I left there and went down to Georgia to officer school and got commissioned. Then I went to several camps after that.
Did you ever get sent to Europe or Japan?
Yes, I finally, from Fort Huachuca, Arizona, I thought we were going towards the Far East of Japan, but we went the opposite way to Europe, and I landed in North Africa and got into the fighting in Italy until the end of the war.
Were you there for VE Day?
Oh, yes.
What were your feelings that day?
Well, VDA was great, except for the fact that we were getting ready to go over to the other side to fight the Japanese. So we were practicing all of 1945, getting ready for the invasion of Japan.
Did you go over to the invasion?
No, I was on shipboard when the atomic bomb was dropped, and they brought us into New York City.
What did you feel about the atomic bomb? Did you think it was a good thing?
I was glad it dropped. At least I didn't have to go over to the Far East. And I think most veterans at that time felt the same way.
When you came home, how long had you been gone?
Well, as I say, I went in 41. I came home in 1946. I got out of the service, but I was a reserve officer. So they called me back in 1948, the year that I got married, and sent me to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I stayed there for 2 years and decided to get out of the service because we were getting ready to engage in the Korean War. And that's another war that I didn't want to get into. So I came home, and they say my wife and I bought my mother's house, which was too big, which I'm in now, and finally got onto the Harwich Police Department. And I stayed there for 37 years, retired in 1988.
So when you finally came home, how had Harwich changed since when you, it must have been
quite a bit. It was a quiet, sleepy town, not too many people in it when I left, but a lot of people started coming down and under the GI Bill, purchasing homes and living on the Cape, and of course more and more people kept coming, so it got bigger and bigger, more complicated.
Did you, the GI Bill, did you or any of your friends benefit from it?
I took advantage of the GI Bill by buying my mother's house and building a new house for her at 4% interest, which is quite low. And that's the only advantage that I took. Now, my brother, who went in the service a little later, he was an art teacher, first year in college, they drafted him. And he did his 2 years, came back, and went back to school under the GI Bill. So it benefited him.
I know this is kind of a strange question, but do you have a favorite memory about that period? I know it can't have been a very happy time, but anything that sticks out in your mind that you particularly enjoyed doing, or I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I guess my greatest joy was getting my commission and coming home and seeing how proud my mother was. That's probably about the most important part.
About during the war, do you have any good war stories?
Well, during the war, war is not very pleasant. And I think most of you have seen it on television. There's nothing like being in it, of course, and it's terrible. And I just hope that we don't have to get into another war.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any other things you'd like to add before we finish?
Well, I must say I'm proud of Harwich. I was born here in Harwich, so I'm a native, and my mother was born here in Harwich. So we have deep roots in Harwich, and I think that Harwich is one of the best towns on the Cape. always has been. I was a heavy weapons officer. That is, we handled machine guns, mortars, automatic rifles, all of the big weapons of the infantry. And I trained with them throughout my career. And we embarked from New York to go to the European theater. We didn't know it at the time until we opened orders 200 miles out to sea. I went over on one single ship. That's the SS Mariposa, which is the flagship of the Hawaiian Lines. It's my outfit. It's one regiment, a field artillery regiment, and an Air Force unit. We went across by ourselves, not in a convoy. Our skipper said he could outrun any submarine afloat, because we didn't really believe him. We landed in Oran, North Africa, which was being contested then by us and the French. That is, half the French were on our side and half were on the other side, so it was a little touchy. We didn't stay there very long. We embarked over to Italy, and we got into Naples, and that was pretty well battered. They even blew up the post office. All the ships in the harbor were sunk. In fact, we got off on a sunken ship. And of course, the first night in, the Germans bombed us. They welcomed us, which was supposed to have been secret. They weren't supposed to know we were coming in. And from there, I moved up towards Anzio and to northern part of Rome. There was no fighting in Rome. North of Rome, I was bivouacked right next to you've heard of the Anzio Express. These are the big railroad guns that used to fire down into Anzio. They fire 40 miles down. The shells are like freight trains coming in. From there, I moved up. We kept fighting that winter of '44. Most of our troops were pulled out to make the invasion in France. So we were kind of thin on the line. What they used to do, that's why they called us a combat team, they'd move us to one part of the line, then the next couple of days move us over somewhere else. So the Germans thought we were a big outfit, bigger than we actually were. But we would just fool them into keeping their troops down there so that the invasion would go along. We did fight with the Japanese, American Japanese, of which Senator Ainu was in. And we also fought with the 10th Mountain Division, where Senator Dole was injured. I can remember the day that they got clobbered. We found out that our president then had died, I think it was in April '45, and we were on the hills fighting the Germans then. And of course that kind of picked up everybody because we wanted to win the war for him. The Germans, of course, surrendered right afterwards, but some of them didn't, or didn't get the word. There was a little touch and go trying to round out the rest of them to make sure that they surrendered. One thing I can say, we almost captured Mussolini. My outfit was about maybe 10 or 12 miles from him. And the partisanos, we used to call them, captured him first. And of course they killed him and his mistress. They were strung up in the square at Milan. We then tried to consolidate all of the troops back and practice on the beaches for the invasion coming up for Japan. During that time, my outfit went up in the hills and we got Christopher Columbus's ashes and brought them down back to Genoa for burial. Now, I'm not sure that they were actually his ashes or not, because there's a question about where he was buried. But the Italians thought that that was his ashes, so we had a big ceremony in Genoa. And I stayed, as I say, working on the beaches. We took out mines, and we practiced actual invasion. And we're preparing, just waiting for ships to take us to the Pacific. And as I say, I was on shipboard when they dropped the bomb, so I came home. Most of them came from Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut. I'd say we were northerners because we practiced and skirmished down south. And of course the southerners didn't like us at all. And they were glad to see us out of there because we tore up their farms and places. I had met a couple of people from Harwich in the service. 2 or 3 of them, because were afraid to come up to see me or talk to me because I was an officer, and they didn't want to bother me. And I also met a couple overseas, including my uncle, who was a first sergeant. He was on his way back home because he had been all through the first unit in Africa and Italy. He was married and had a child, and yet they took him in because he wanted to do his 2 years and get out, but he got stuck with the war. I also had a couple of officers that were skilled in languages, 2 brothers. One of them was killed over there. Both of them could speak about 6 or 8 languages. And that kind of made me think about trying to get into the Army language school at Monterey, California. But that was full, so I couldn't switch. If I could, I probably would have stayed in the service. I had a lieutenant that was machine gunned over in Italy, and I thought that he had been cut in half, and I figured that he had died. And after the war, I was in Boston getting a haircut, and who walks in but this lieutenant? They had fixed him up, and he was just as good as new. And that sort of surprised me and impressed me with the doctors and the job they did on him.